Did you know that across the Civilization franchise there are a couple of leaders that might have never existed? We've already covered a couple of them in the first video. Let's get to know another 3. The first one of these is Tomyris. As many of you pointed out in the first video, thanks a lot for the support by the way, Tomyris is also likely to be a non-existent leader. First, it's important to note that most we know about Tomyris comes from the writings of Herodotus, an ancient historian known for having written his histories where he documented the wars between Greece and Persia. There are other writers that briefly mention her, but it's just that. A brief mention that doesn't add much more information and what they say pretty much the same as Herodotus. There, we're told about the queen of one of the Scythian tribes of the area, Tomyris. She is mostly renowned for having assassinated none other than Cyrus the Great in 530 BCE, often being depicted with Cyrus' head in her hands. Pretty hardcore. So always having just one main source is often considered to be a red flag. And another red flag is that Herodotus wrote around 100 years after Tomyris supposedly lived. Moreover, it's also worth mentioning that, for instance, we do know another Greek historian that covered this period of history named Ctesias, but he doesn't talk about Tomyris, and as I mentioned before, the other isolated texts about her aren't that different or don't add much to the story of Herodotus. This is even more suspicious because who wouldn't like to talk and develop the story of the woman that chopped the head of Cyrus, right? The next leader that might not be real is Hiawatha. Having appeared in Civ 5, the leader of the Iroquois is a bit of a contested figure too. Hiawatha was an indigenous leader of one of the native peoples from North America. Using his powerful speeches and strong rhetoric, he founded what's known as the Iroquois Confederation, the union of 5 different native peoples under the Great Law of Peace, a constitution that some centuries later inspired the American founding fathers. Now, let's talk about why Hiawatha might not be a real person. First, in a similar case to that of Kupe, all we know about Hiawatha comes from the oral tradition of the indigenous American people. This means that we lack actual evidence like writings or relics to back up what we are told. Second, oral tradition has resulted in different versions of the story. They do have some things in common, like describing Hiawatha as a warrior or him having a great speech ability, but they also differ in some key aspects, often going for kinda unbelievable or epic events, like Hiawatha being a cannibal. In fact, Hiawatha's become a kinda legendary figure in American native folklore. This legendary status has been enhanced by the story of an eclipse that coincided with the foundation of the Iroquois Confederacy, which might also be another element to add up to Hiawatha's legend. As well as with other of these leaders, it's also quite possible that the real Hiawatha did exist, and as time and generations went on, he became entangled with legend, myth, and why not, a pinch of actual history. Here we have another contested leader, one that those who've been playing Civ games for a long time will recognize: Ragnar. Despite his controversial appearance leading the Viking Empire in Civ 4, you can learn more about it here, Ragnar was indeed an important historical figure in Scandinavian culture. Let's find more about him. So, our main historical source comes from the Danish historian Saxo Grammaticus. In this book, we learn that Ragnar was a Danish king who ruled the Kingdom of Denmark around the 9th century CE. There, we're also told about Ragnar's battles against the Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne. Other medieval sources also add up and mention his famous raids to the British Isles and the supposed vengeance carried out by his sons after Ragnar's death. Now, it's important to note how all these apparently historical accounts of Ragnar have been mixed with a more legendary figure mentioned and developed in Nordic tales named sagas, a series of epic texts that talk about the legendary leader called Ragnar. These texts, however, often depict fantasy situations involving creatures like dragons or elves. Unlike other of these leaders, we do have mentions of a Viking leader who took part in the Siege of Paris in 845, for instance, and wreaked havoc in the 9th century Europe, but they all appeared to be talking about different Viking leaders, or at least we lack enough precise evidence to pinpoint all of these mentions to the same real person. This, added to the much more known epic and fantastic texts, makes it possible to raise the question: is Ragnar just a legendary Viking cultural hero? Or was he an actual military Viking leader? Thanks for watching!